3 months ago, nothing in my environment changed. Same place, same resources, same challenges, but my results changed completely because I stopped trying to change my life and started changing the way my brain works. 3 months ago, my life didn't change because my circumstances changed. My life changed because my brain changed. Most people are waiting on motivation. I stopped waiting and started rewiring. See, I realized something most people never do. Your results are not a reflection of your potential. They are a reflection of your programming. And if your programming is flawed, effort won't save you. I had to ask myself a dangerous question, not what do I want, but who do I need to become to naturally produce what I want? Because outcomes don't chase people. Outcomes chase identities. So I stopped trying to do new things with an old mindset. That's like installing new software on a broken operating system. The first thing I did was audit my inputs. What I listened to, what I watched, what I read, what I allowed into my mind when nobody was watching, because your brain is always learning, even when you're not intentional. And if you don't choose the inputs, the world will choose them for you. I cut off mental junk food, no random scrolling, no pointless conversations, no borrowing opinions from people who weren't living the life I wanted. I replaced it with intentional repetition, not motivation, conditioning, because repetition doesn't just build skill, repetition builds belief. Then I learned something that hurt my feelings, but it saved my future. Motivation is unreliable. Discipline is undefeated. If you need to feel like it to do it, you'll never do it consistently. So I stopped letting my emotions vote. I decided my feelings could have an opinion, but not authority. I built systems that worked even on bad days, because success isn't built on great days, it's built on ordinary days done consistently. Next, I stopped making comfort-based decisions. Comfort asks, what feels good right now? Value asks, what pays me later? Comfort keeps you broke, value makes you free. Every time I chose discomfort on purpose, my brain rewired itself a little more, and after a while, growth stopped feeling scary and started feeling normal. Then I focused on leverage, not doing more, doing what matters. I stopped being busy and started being effective. One skill, one habit, one decision that multiplied everything else. Because success is rarely about addition, it's about multiplication. And finally, the most important shift of all, I stopped negotiating with my old self. No more, I'll start tomorrow. No more, just this once. No more internal debates. Once the decision was final, the progress was automatic. Your brain respects certainty, it resists confusion. In just 3 months, my thinking elevated. My standards rose. My results followed. Not because I became lucky, but because I became intentional. And here's the truth I'll leave you with. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your conditioning. So if you want a new life, don't just change your actions, change your identity. Because when the mind is rewired, success is no longer something you chase. It's something you produce. I stopped asking, what do I want? Because that question kept me stuck in frustration. Wanting is easy, wanting costs nothing. Everybody wants more money, more confidence, more freedom, more respect. But wanting never forced me to change. It only made me more aware of the gap between where I was and where I wished I could be. And the more I focused on what I wanted, the more powerless I felt, because I was chasing outcomes without addressing the person producing the outcomes. Then one day I asked a different question. Who do I need to become to deserve the results I say I want? That question didn't feel good. It didn't flatter me, it exposed me. Because suddenly the issue wasn't luck, timing, or opportunity. The issue was me. My habits, my standards, my thinking, my discipline, my self-image. I realized that success doesn't respond to desire, it responds to identity. Life doesn't give you what you hope for, it gives you what you are aligned with. So instead of chasing goals, I started studying the kind of person who naturally achieves those goals. I looked at how they think when things go wrong. I looked at how they manage their time, their emotions, their commitments. I looked at what they tolerate, and more importantly, what they refuse to tolerate. And that's when it hit me. My results were perfectly designed for the version of me I was showing up as every day. If I wanted different results, I couldn't just work harder. I had to upgrade the person doing the work. So I began rebuilding myself from the inside out. I stopped asking, what do I feel like doing today? And started asking, what would the future version of me do right now? I raised my standards in private, not just in public. I stopped letting my mood decide my behavior. I stopped making excuses sound reasonable. Every small decision became a vote for the person I was becoming. At first, it felt uncomfortable. Growth always does. When you change your identity, your old habits fight back. Your old thinking tries to negotiate. Your comfort zone tries to convince you that consistency is optional. But I learned that you cannot become a new person while obeying old rules. Something had to die so something greater could live. As I changed who I was, my actions changed automatically. I didn't need motivation to stay disciplined because discipline became part of my identity. I didn't need reminders to think bigger because my perspective expanded naturally. I wasn't forcing success anymore. I was aligning with it. That's when progress stopped feeling heavy. Because when you become the right person, the right actions feel normal. And when the actions feel normal, results stop being a struggle. The moment I stopped asking what I wanted and committed to who I needed to become, everything accelerated. Because goals are temporary, but identity is permanent. And once you shift your identity, your life has no choice but to follow. I came to a hard realization. My mind was overloaded with information, but undernourished with truth. I was consuming all day, every day, yet growing very little. I was hearing noise instead of wisdom, watching distractions instead of direction, reading headlines instead of substance, and thinking in patterns that were inherited, not chosen. And then I understood something that changed everything. My results were not just shaped by my effort, they were shaped by my inputs. The mind is not neutral, it is a processor. Whatever you feed it consistently, it turns into beliefs, habits, and decisions. And whether I liked it or not, my daily inputs were programming me. Every conversation, every video, every song, every thought was writing code into my brain. So if I wanted a different output, I couldn't keep feeding myself the same mental diet. I started paying attention to what I allowed into my ears. I noticed how many conversations were built on complaining, blaming, and limiting beliefs. I realized I was unconsciously borrowing the mindset of people who were stuck simply by listening to them. So I became selective, not arrogant, intentional. I chose voices that challenged me, stretched me, and spoke from experience, not excuses. Because if you listen long enough, you start to think the way you hear. Then I looked at what I was watching. Hours were disappearing into content that entertained me but never elevated me. I wasn't relaxing, I was escaping. And escape slowly trains your brain to avoid responsibility. So I replaced mindless consumption with intentional exposure. I watched things that expanded my perspective, sharpened my thinking, and forced me to confront what I was capable of. I stopped asking, is this enjoyable? And started asking, is this useful? What I read had to change too. I realized that reading isn't about information, it's about transformation. So I stopped reading randomly and started reading strategically. I read things that upgraded how I think about money, time, discipline, and value. And every time I read, I asked one question: how does this change the way I see myself and the woe? RLD, because knowledge that doesn't change your behavior is just entertainment with better grammar. But the most important input I had to reprogram was my internal dialogue. What I said to myself when things went wrong, what I replayed in my mind when no one was around. I realized my thoughts were on autopilot, repeating old stories about my limits, my past, and my fears. So I interrupted them, I challenged them, I replaced them. Not with fake positivity, but with truth that demanded responsibility. I learned that you don't rise to positive thinking, you rise to disciplined thinking. So I trained my mind the same way you train a muscle, with repetition, resistance, and consistency. Every day, I fed my mind on purpose, and slowly my thinking changed. When my thinking changed, my decisions changed. When my decisions changed, my life followed. Reprogramming my inputs wasn't dramatic. It was daily, quiet, intentional. But over time, it reshaped everything. Because when you control what goes in, you no longer have to beg for what comes out. I used to wait until I felt ready, until I felt motivated, until the timing felt right. And without realizing it, I was letting my emotions control my progress. Some days I was on fire, focused, driven, unstoppable. Other days I was tired, distracted, uncommitted, and inconsistent, and I couldn't understand why my results were unstable. Then I learned a truth that changed the way I live. Motivation is emotional, but discipline is structural. One depends on how you feel. The other depends on who you decide to be. Motivation feels powerful, but it is temporary. It comes from inspiration, excitement, or pressure, and it disappears just as fast. Discipline, on the other hand, is not loud. It doesn't hype you up. It simply shows up. It works quietly, repeatedly, especially on days when nothing feels exciting. And those are the days that separate people who change their lives from people who keep restarting them. I realized that every time I waited to feel motivated, I was training my brain to believe that action required emotion. That's a dangerous pattern because life doesn't always give you emotions that support your goals. Stress, fear, boredom, and doubt are part of growth. If you need to feel good to move forward, you'll stop the moment growth feels uncomfortable. Discipline removes that negotiation. It says, this gets done regardless of how I feel. So I stopped asking myself, do I feel like doing this? And started asking, is this aligned with the life I'm building? That shift changed everything. I built routines that didn't depend on excitement. I created standards that didn't change with my mood. I committed to doing the work even when my energy was low, my confidence was shaky, and my progress was invisible. At first, it felt robotic, unemotional, even boring, but then something powerful happened. The more I acted without waiting for motivation, the more confidence I gained. Because confidence isn't built by thinking about action. It's built by taking action consistently. Discipline created momentum, and momentum created belief. I also learned that discipline is an act of self-respect. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, your brain records it. Every time you break one, it records that too. Over time, your identity is shaped by which pattern you repeat. I didn't want to be someone who talked a lot and finished little. I wanted to be someone my future self could rely on. Discipline made that possible. Motivation is useful, but it's not reliable. Discipline doesn't wait for the perfect moment. It creates progress in imperfect ones. And once discipline becomes your foundation, motivation becomes a bonus, not a requirement. That's when consistency becomes natural and success stops being accidental. For a long time, I didn't realize that most of my decisions were being made by one invisible question: what will make me feel better right now? I thought I was being logical, but I was actually being comfortable. Comfort disguised itself as rest, as patience, as self-care, but underneath it was avoidance of effort, avoidance of discomfort, avoidance of responsibility. And comfort never asked me who I was becoming. It only cared about how I felt in the moment. Comfort-based decisions are easy to justify. Skipping the work feels reasonable when you're tired. Delaying the hard conversation feels wise when you don't want conflict. Choosing what's familiar feels safe when growth feels uncertain. And the danger is that none of these decisions feel like failure. They feel harmless. But over time, they quietly shape a life that never stretches beyond its limits. The shift happened when I started asking a different question. What creates the most value in the long run? Value-based decisions don't always feel good immediately. They often feel inconvenient, uncomfortable, and even painful. But they pay dividends. Value focuses on impact, not relief. It prioritizes growth over ease, contribution over convenience, and progress over pleasure. Once I began choosing value, my priorities changed. I stopped managing my day around what felt easiest and started structuring it around what mattered most. I learned to sit in discomfort without trying to escape it. I discovered that discomfort wasn't a signal to stop. It was a signal that I was expanding. And every time I chose value over comfort, my tolerance for growth increased. I also realized that comfort is expensive. It costs discipline. It costs momentum. It costs potential. The price of comfort is always paid later with interest. Value, on the other hand, feels expensive up front, but it compounds. The effort you invest today reduces the effort required tomorrow. The discipline you build now becomes freedom later. This shift affected how I spent my time, who I listened to, and what I said yes to. I stopped over-explaining my boundaries. I stopped justifying my ambition. I accepted that not everyone would understand my choices, and that was fine. Value-based decisions are often lonely before they are rewarding. The most powerful realization was this: every decision is a vote for the person you are becoming. Comfort votes for the current version of you. Value votes for your future self. And once I committed to honoring my future more than my feelings, my life began to move forward with clarity and purpose. Replacing comfort with value didn't make life easier, it made it better. Because when you consistently choose what matters over what's easy, growth stops being optional and progress becomes inevitable. For a long time, I believed success came from doing more effort, more hours, more tasks, more hustle. I stayed busy, exhausted, and proud of how much I was juggling, yet my progress was slow and scattered. I mistook movement for momentum and activity for achievement. Then I discovered a truth that reshaped my entire approach to growth. Not all skills are equal. Some skills add. One skill multiplies. I realized that the difference between people who struggle and people who scale is not effort, it's leverage. Leverage is the ability to produce greater results from the same amount of energy. And the skill that changed everything for me was learning how to think clearly under pressure and make high-quality decisions consistently. Once I mastered that, everything else improved. Most people react to life. They let circumstances, emotions, and urgency decide their actions. I used to do the same, but reaction keeps you stuck in survival mode. I learned to pause, evaluate, and choose intentionally. That single shift multiplied my time, my focus, and my results. When you make better decisions, you don't need to fix as many mistakes. This skill sharpened my focus. I stopped spreading myself thin, trying to improve everything at once. I learned how to identify the small actions that created the biggest return. I stopped asking, what can I do next? And started asking, what matters most? That question eliminated distraction and replaced it with direction. As my decision-making improved, my confidence grew. Not because things became easier, but because I trusted myself to handle difficulty. I wasn't guessing anymore. I wasn't chasing every opportunity. I was choosing deliberately, and clarity is powerful. When your mind is clear, your actions are decisive. When your actions are decisive, progress accelerates. This skill also transformed how I communicated. I became precise with my words, firm with my boundaries, and intentional with my commitments. I stopped saying yes out of fear and no out of doubt. Every conversation became more effective because it was grounded in clarity, not emotion. The greatest part is that this skill compounded. Every improvement reinforced the next. Better thinking led to better habits. Better habits led to better outcomes. Better outcomes reinforced better thinking. One disciplined skill created a chain reaction that touched every area of my life. Mastering that one skill taught me a final lesson. Success isn't about knowing everything, it's about mastering what matters most. When you focus on the skill that multiplies everything else, progress stops being linear and starts becoming exponential. For a long time, my biggest obstacle wasn't a lack of opportunity, resources, or ability. It was a conversation, a quiet, internal negotiation I had with myself every single day. The old version of me always wanted to say, it wanted comfort. RT, familiarity, and shortcuts. It wanted to delay, to justify, to explain why today wasn't the right day to fully commit. And every time I listened, progress slowed. The old version of me was persuasive. It sounded reasonable. It knew my fears, my past failures, my weak moments. It would say things like, you can start tomorrow, or just take it easy today, or you deserve a break. None of those thoughts sounded destructive. In fact, they sounded kind. But over time, I realized something painful. Every negotiation was a vote against my future. Negotiation creates loopholes, and loopholes are where discipline goes to die. I noticed a pattern. The days I negotiated, I felt busy but unfulfilled. The weeks I negotiated, I made plans but no real progress. The months I negotiated, my goals stayed the same while time kept moving. The problem wasn't that I didn't know what to do. The problem was that I kept giving the old version of myself authority over decisions it no longer deserved to make. So I made a decision that changed everything. I stopped debating with myself. I stopped asking permission from my past to build my future. I accepted that the old version of me was familiar, but familiarity is not loyalty. Just because something is comfortable doesn't mean it's correct. This shift was uncomfortable at first. When you stop negotiating, excuses get loud, resistance increases, the mind looks for escape routes. But I learned that clarity silences chaos. Once the decision is final, the struggle decreases. When there is no debate, there is no delay. I replaced should I with this is who I am now. I replaced I'll try with I do. Identity removed hesitation. Standards replaced willpower. I no longer waited to see how I felt before acting. I acted because it aligned with who I chose to become. The old version of me still shows up sometimes, but it no longer has a microphone. It can suggest, but it cannot decide. Growth requires separation. You cannot evolve while giving equal power to the version of you that created the problem. Once I stopped negotiating, consistency became natural. Not easy, but clear. And clarity is powerful, because when the mind knows there is no alternative, it finds a way forward. Stopping negotiation didn't make me perfect. It made me decisive. And decisiveness compounds. One clear decision led to another. Momentum replaced hesitation, progress replaced promises. Letting go of the old version of myself wasn't about self-hate. It was about self-respect. I honored my future by refusing to bargain with my past. And once I did that, growth stopped being a question and became a direction. What changed in these 3 months wasn't time, luck, or opportunity. What changed was my thinking, my standards, and my identity. I didn't magically become a different person. I became a more intentional one. I stopped letting my environment shape me and started shaping myself on purpose. This is what I've learned. You don't need years to change your life, but you do need a decision to upgrade your thinking, a decision to control your inputs, a decision to choose discipline over emotion, value over comfort, clarity over chaos, and growth over familiarity. Your future is not waiting on more motivation, it's waiting on alignment. Alignment between who you say you want to be and what you do every single day when no one is watching. If you want different results, don't just set bigger goals, set higher standards. Become the kind of person for whom success is natural, not forced. Because when you rewire the mind, the life has no choice but to follow.